This video will give you a brief about what actually a startup is and how its incorporation is important, and further, how to incorporate it. Introduction to startup. A startup is a young company that is just beginning to develop. Startups are usually small, initially financed, and operated by a handful of founders or one individual. These companies offer a product or service that is not currently being offered elsewhere in the market, or that the founder believes is being offered in an inferior manner. In an early stage, startups companies' expenses tend to exceed their revenues as they work on developing, testing, and marketing their ideas. As such, they often require financing. Startup may be funded by traditional small business loans from banks or credit unions, or by government sponsored loans from local banks, or by grants by non-profit organizations and state government. A startup that can prove its potential may be able to attract venture capital financing in exchange for giving up some control and percentage of company's ownership. Need for incorporation of a startup. Initially, in a venture, founders tend to enter into agreements with co founder, investors, developers, employees, and independent contractors. When you form a corporation, your corporation take on these risks of these contracts on your behalf. Reducing your risk will be notably more attractive to your investors. A properly formed corporation provides directors and officers with indemnification against claim from the third parties. Further, incorporation allows you to freely transfer your shares pursuant to state laws and any restriction in your stock purchase agreement. If permitted, you may be able to freely transfer your shares without the prior written consent of all other shareholders. Your company IP is what investors, partners, other team members, and your users will perceive as valuable. The value in your company's IP is often what will increase the company's valuation as whole. If you invest in IP protection and strategy for building a solid IP portfolio, then your company's valuation will also increase accordingly. If you develop your IP prior to the incorporation without taking the necessary steps to assign the IP to the corporation, then the company may not end up owning the IP in full, which may result in a break in the chain of title. Essentials of the incorporation process. First being nature of entity, second, shareholding structure, third, sweat equity, fourth, rights and duties of founders and investors, fifth, retirement of co founder, sixth, protection of intellectual rights, and the seventh, devolution of ownership. Nature of equity. Indian regulations provide for numerous options of commercial entities from sole proprietary concerns to partnerships and companies based on the nature of the company, business, constitution of the ownership, and the appetite to handle compliance. An appropriate structure needs to be identified, preferably with a professional guidance. When someone starts a business, one of the most important decisions that he must make is to determine what type of business organization it will be. The three main choices have been until recently been sole proprietorship, partnership, and corporation. Every constitution has its own pros and cons. Like in the case of sole proprietorship, the pros being it's easy to start, there exists a management which is flexible enough, and there is no requirement of public disclosure. Whereas the cons are unlimited liability, no separate legal entity, limited capital, and no perpetual succession. Therefore, an entrepreneur needs to be well appraised about these situations prior to choosing the constitution. For example, a private limited company may sound very attractive, but the compliance cost and the regulatory hurdles may make it prohibitive for a startup to maintain the structure. Sweat equity. Sweat equity shares mean such equity shares which are issued by a company to its directors or employees at a discount or for consideration other than cash for providing their own how or making available rights in the nature of intellectual property rights or value addition by whatever name. Sweat equity or earned equity is one of the most common carrots startups offer to attract talent. In many cases, there could be part time, highly skilled team members who work for a stake in lieu of financial rewards. Such arrangements need to be reduced to writings to ensure that the right of sweat equity members are protected even where the shareholding of the entity changes in future owing to investors or partners being inducted. Rights and duties of founders and investors. Once a startup is incorporated, there are numerous instances of formal decision making, from choosing a bank and opening an account to entering into vendor contract, recruiting employments, etc. In practice, it is impossible for all stakeholders to discuss, meet, and decide on every business decision, and hence such powers are given to the management or the founders. However, the decision which needs to be collectively taken should be identified together with the mode, that is, personal meetings or email approvals. Another area of concern with investors and founders are the right to tag along in the events of a stake sale, dilution, and right of first refusal in the events of raising further capital. These are complex and tricky issues and need to be deliberated, understood in letter and spirit by the founders and then accepted. It is suggested to seek appropriate professional advice as these aspects shall also form a part of incorporation document. Retirement of a co founder. Usually, the journey of a startup is anything but smooth. But sometimes it could be the case where one of the co founder intend to move out of the venture for some reason. At this juncture, if he pulls out his capital or claims stake over the intellectual assets, it could jeopardize the business and might question its very existence. The situation gets more complex when there is an angel investor who has invested on the strengths of all the co founders. Preempting such eventualities, it is suggested to add watertight clauses in the incorporation document or founders agreement to ensure that business is ring fenced and whoever lasts the distance alone gets the reward. Protection of intellectual right. In most of the new age startups, intellectual assets and rights are all they have, and hence it becomes extremely imperative to protect and safeguard these assets. The incorporation document shall categorically provide for transfer of all the intangible assets, including main and sound alike domain names, licenses, social media pages, websites, etc., which would have been held in the name of the founders to the entity. This ensures that the entity is the legal owner of these assets and that the founders only manage or handle these assets on the behalf of the business. Devolution of ownership. Though it might sound extreme, this is a very important safeguard startups needs to have in mind. In the event of eventuality, that is death or incapacity of a co-founder, the treatment of his stake or the devolution of ownership stake to his legal heirs or nominees, and more importantly their rights over the management, needs to be clearly identified and made part of the incorporation document. Generally, in the event of succession, the legal heirs might have the ownership stakes transferred, but they may not have any say in the operational management, as would have been the case with the deceased co founder. This is unlike traditional business unique to startups, since these are formed entirely on the intellectual prowess of the co founders, and substituting them with family may not be reasonable. Thank you for watching this video. For more videos, please visit the website.